Welcome back to my G1 Retro Reviews. Today we're taking a look at what is essentially the Season 1 finale of the original Transformers series, Heavy Metal War. Not to be confused with the game on Cybertron.com. In this episode, Megatron uses the power of the other Decepticons in a one-on-one battle with Optimus Prime, but not in a spirit bomb kind of way, in more of a cheaty cheater McCheat face kind of way. We begin this episode with the Constructicons attacking a construction site of some kind of fancy free energy power plant.
We return to our master, Megatron! They're with the Decepticons.
Oh really? What was your first clue? The fact that they have Decepticon symbols on them? Or the fact that Scrapper just said Megatron was their leader? So the Constructicons return to the Decepticons.
My Constructicons have returned to our temporary base right on schedule. They were worth the time we spent building them in these caverns.
Now, as we'll see in later episodes, like The Secret of Omega Supreme and The 5 Faces of Darkness, this one statement from Megatron causes a lot of continuity conflicts. Because in The Secret of Omega Supreme, the Constructicons already existed, and they were actually turned into Decepticons by Megatron and his Robo Smasher. And in The 5 Faces of Darkness, we see a scene of Megatron actually being created by the Constructicons. All 8 of them. What? 8? Yep, looks like there's a couple extra Constructicons in this scene. Now how can this be explained? The Decepticons built the Constructicons on Earth, but then we learn that the Constructicons already existed on Cybertron. And not only that, but they somehow built Megatron, the leader of the Decepticons, before even they themselves were reprogrammed into Decepticons by Megatron. It's very confusing. Obviously, the real answer is that these were 3 different episodes written by 3 different writers, and nobody at Hasbro or Sunbow really bothered or cared enough to keep track of the origins of the Constructicons. But if you want an in-universe lore reason, here's my theory. The Constructicons we see in 5 Faces of Darkness are not the same Constructicons that we know. After all, we've seen in additional fiction that there have been other Constructicons besides the main 6. Gravedigger, Hauler, Erector, Scoop, Buckethead, Quickmix, just to name a few. They were all also Constructicons or former Constructicons. So I say, what if Constructicons isn't just the main group of 6 that we know that formed Devastator? What if the title of Constructicon is more generic? Like, what if it's like a job title or class of Transformer? Like a Viacon or a Seeker? Maybe these Constructicons who built Megatron weren't related to the main 6 that we know. They're just more Constructicons. After all, what do Constructicons do? They build stuff. And not just buildings and things like that. Remember in City of Steel? The Constructicons used the leftover parts of Optimus Prime to create the Alligatorcon. So obviously they know how to create living things too, not just buildings or machines. So then what about the main 6 we know? Well, obviously they were other Constructicons who existed on Cybertron, and were eventually reprogrammed by Megatron. Maybe Megatron was feeling nostalgic. Maybe he was missing his 8 daddies who created him and wanted his own Constructicons again. Okay, so what about Megatron's line in this episode? Well, that one's a little tougher, but remember how in the last episode, we learned that the Insecticons were on board a Decepticon escape pod. Who's to say that that was the only one? What if the Constructicons were also on board one? And what if theirs was buried in this cavern? And what if, unlike the Insecticons, the Constructicons didn't make it to Earth in one piece? Maybe their escape pods sent out some kind of distress signal, and the other Decepticons had to come and rescue them and put them back together. Thus explaining Megatron's line here. They didn't so much build them from scratch like the Dinobots, more like they rebuilt them after they were broken into pieces. Which makes me wonder, if there were 6 Constructicons on board their escape pod, why were there only 3 Insecticons on theirs? We do know that there are more Insecticons than just the main 3. Maybe the other 4 were on board, but they didn't survive the crash. Okay, so I've gone on long enough about that. Maybe I should have saved that for one of my Transformers series videos. Well, on with the episode review. When Megatron approaches the Ark, some of the Autobots take shots at him. First up is Cliffjumper, who is probably supposed to be attacking Megatron with his glass gas, but here he's firing it out of his wrists instead of his gun. And it acts more like Ironhide's liquid nitrogen, which freezes Megatron in a ball of ice, which he quickly breaks out of. Now why couldn't Galvatron do that in Headmasters? Or, Megatron in the movies? It's also weird how neither Cliff or Megatron have any lines here. You'd think they'd have at least some trash talk between them. Well, next up is Wheeljack.
Let's see how he likes my new shock blast cannon.
I like how Wheeljack's new shock blast cannon blows up in his face. It plays into his whole mad scientist thing, and not every invention of his is going to work. It's also funny how Shock Blast was also the name of Shockwave in Energon, because, Hasbro lost the trademark to his original name. And one of Energon's Shock Blast's defining characteristics was the gigantic cannon that he had for an arm. It's also funny how Ironhide is shooting laser beams out of his fists like a GoBot. Maybe someone got their 80s transforming robots confused. So Megatron issues a challenge to Optimus Prime, and he accepts. We then see Megatron's scheme, to infuse himself with the power of his other Decepticons in order to have a significant advantage in his upcoming duel. I wonder if this is how Megatron X in Transformers Cyberverse became so powerful. Did he steal the power of his fellow Decepticons?
I'm still not crazy about this combat deal, Optimus. We all know how tricky Megatron can be. I mean, they don't call those creeps Decepticons for nothing.
They literally call themselves Decepticons. That doesn't set off any red flags?
When it's finally time for Optimus Prime and Megatron's battle, it's pretty cute how the Autobots and Decepticons sit and watch the fight. I especially love how Soundwave ejects Laserbeak and Ravage and gives him some little pets. Aw, so cute.
My power chip gives him the use of my cluster bombs. And the use of my null ray, too.
You should see me do that when I've got my power chip.
So in this episode, Megatron is kind of like Mega Man after he defeats a bunch of Robot Masters and gets their abilities. Hey, remember when we saw him use Metal Blade in a previous episode? This makes me wish that there was a Transformers game where you could defeat other Transformers and get their powers. Scrapper mistakenly refers to Scavenger as Scrounge.
Careful, Scrounge! This volcano isn't inactive!
Which was apparently his working name before he was named Scavenger, even though he got his name right earlier in the episode. And coincidentally, Scrounge is actually the name of another Transformer in G1. So Megatron defeats Optimus and the Autobots are forced into exile. During this scene, we can see Huffer offer to pull Optimus' trailer for him. This scene would eventually be homaged decades later, as Kingdom Huffer is the first ever Huffer toy specifically designed to be able to pull an Optimus Prime's trailer. Although there were actually designs for a Masterpiece Huffer figure that never happened. I can't find note of it online, but I think he was actually going to be an accessory figure for MP10 Optimus Prime, and probably would have been able to pull his trailer. Otherwise, why bother including him? But of course, when you think about it, including a Huffer repaint with every repaint of MP10 would have been too costly and is no doubt the reason why he was ultimately scrapped. Just think, there's a lot of MP10 repaints. Could you imagine if each one of them also came with a Huffer repaint? You'd have Golden Lagoon Huffer, an Evangelion Huffer, a Nemesis Huffer, a 7-Eleven Huffer, a Ghostbusters Huffer, a Shattered Glass Huffer, a Year of the Horse Huffer, etc. I'm sure there's probably some Huffer fan out there that would have loved those, but that's a lot of Huffers. The Constructicons attempt to destroy Teletran 1, but they are stopped by Grimlock and the Dinobots. Which is kind of ironic because in his debut episode, that's exactly what Grimlock himself did. It's also kind of cool how Snarl can shoot laser blasts from his sword, just like Link from The Legend of Zelda. And in an episode with many firsts, including the first appearance of the Constructicons, and the establishment of their rivalry with the Dinobots, we are also given our first ever combiner in Transformers, Devastator, who is played by Arthur Burghardt, who's also known for playing Destro in G.I. Joe. When Wheeljack and Ratchet finish repairing Optimus Prime, it's weird how they flip up his chest windows, kind of like Soundwave's chest compartment, instead of how he usually opens his chest. And we get a quick peek inside his chest. And like in the episode Divide and Conquer, we don't see the Matrix of Leadership in there, which probably wasn't invented yet. Although, from what we know about the production timeline of the '86 Transformers movie, I think it would be pretty soon. When Talatran 1 is showing whose weapons Megatron used to damage Optimus Prime, we can see various Decepticons shown with their names and a simple description. First is Megatron, Decepticon leader. Okay, no problem there. Next is Starscream, who's just described as Silver. Okay, I guess he is the Gray or Silver Seeker. Now that I say it, Silver Seeker sounds like a superhero name. Then there's Thundercracker, Blue, but they show Megatron's picture again instead. Next is Soundwave, Decepticon Communicator, which is a good description, but the R kind of goes off the screen. Then we have Rumble, who is described as a red robot. Oh boy, this whole debate. Obviously, in the cartoon, Rumble is more of a blue or blue and purple, but his toy is red. Did they really mix this up in the show too? It seems like even Teletran is confused as to which color Rumble is supposed to be. Well, after they realize that Megatron cheated, Hound creates a hologram of a giant Autobot. You know, I'm surprised in all these years we never got a figure or something of this guy. He would make a good Build-A-Figure for the RED toy line, but all we've gotten so far is basically a name given to him by the former Transformers Collectors Club, Halonix Maximus, which is probably the most obvious name that you can think of next to Gigantobot or Bigamous Supreme. This is when Optimus Prime chooses to shoot Devastator in the crotch, ouch, which causes the Constructicons to disconnect, which it should. I mean, if you took a hit in the crotch like that, would you be able to keep it together? But man, Optimus, I know you were probably going for Devastator's weak point, but still, that feels like dirty fighting. And if that weren't bad enough, the Dinobots then drive the Constructicons into the lava, who are then followed by the rest of the Decepticons. Well, so much for them. I guess that means the series is over, right?
We shall rise again.
Yes, of course, all the Decepticons will return in the next season. But, you know, this is kind of interesting how this almost parallels the Beast Wars episode Aftermath, with Scorponok and Pterosaur falling into the lava. The differences being that this is the G1 Season 1 finale, and Aftermath was the Beast Wars Season 2 premiere. And here, the Decepticons all survived their dunk in the lava. And in Beast Wars, Pterosaur and Scorponok seemingly perish. Although, according to the Beast Wars sourcebook, apparently they survived and managed to escape the lava only after the Beast Wars were over. And of course, Megatron falling into the lava reminds me of something. Two things, actually. One being the Terminator, and the other, of course, being his namesake when he was thrown into lava with his own spark inside him. So I guess this isn't Megatron's first lava bath, nor would it be his last. This was a great episode of G1. There were definitely some points in this episode where the animation looked amazing, but just as often, or more, the characters were so wildly off-model that they totally looked different from one shot to the next. But overall, this was a very enjoyable and very memorable episode of G1. What about you? What did you think of this classic episode of the original Transformers series? As always, let me know down in the comments. Remember to like, subscribe, and do all that other fun stuff. And I'll see you back here next time for the first episode of the Transformers Season 2, Autobot Spike. See you then.